In this Magic Legends video, I'm going to be showing you all of the white spells and white cards in the game. So these are the cards you're going to be able to collect throughout the game, either whether you chose the Sanctifier class at the beginning or not, and sort of go through these, show you what they all are, as well as all of them in practice on the battlefield. Additionally, I have included the 2 artifact cards that are presently in the game because they can be included in white decks, so you'll probably want that information in deciding whether or not to put them in your deck. First things first, let's go through these sorceries. These are all the spells that you cast that are effectively instantaneous on the battlefield that have some sort of effect. Then we'll go through the creatures and enchantments. The first spell is called Victory or Death, and essentially what it does is a very small amount of damage in a rather large AoE around you, and it taunts enemies. That's going to force enemies to attack you. So if you want enemies to all attack you, maybe while you chase them around and your creatures deal damage to them, or maybe you're playing in a group and you want to be the tank character, this is good for you. It only costs 1 mana, so you can use this really regularly. The next spell is called Banishment, and it essentially removes a creature from the battlefield for 5 seconds. So it's sort of going to like phase it out. You'll still see it, but you won't be able to attack it or do anything to it, and it won't be able to do anything. So if you need to remove like a very hostile enemy for a little bit while you take care of some smaller minions, this is a good spell. Chain the Wicked is an interesting spell because it allows you to hold down the cast button in order to keep channeling it. And what it's going to do is it's going to keep damaging and stunning enemies while you hold that button. And once the effect expires, it's going to deal damage to all those creatures depending on how much damage you took. So if you need like a massive CC spell and want to deal some incredible damage, this is a great spell, and you can do it for a little bit of mana or you can do it for a lot depending on how long you want to hold it down. Lightshield Barrier allows you to bubble your highest toughness creature for 8 seconds where it takes no damage, and then after the effect expires, it reflects 50% of the damage in an AoE around it to creatures that it would have taken if it hadn't had that damage shield. So this is really good for keeping your best creature alive in a pinch, or if it's completely surrounded and then taking out a small group of enemies. Altruism allows you to heal every time you take damage for 10 seconds, and it not only heals you, it heals nearby allies, so this is going to be other players or your creatures. So if you have a bunch of creatures out, this is a great way to heal them. Divine Wrath is sort of a range-targeted AoE that allows you to deal modest damage at range, and it stuns the enemies as well in a small, very small AoE compared to other ones. So if you need to deal some like quick burst damage and you need to stun a couple targets, it's not a bad way to do it, and it's very cheap. Spirit Offering allows you to put 3 Spirit Wells on the ground that heal you when you walk over them. This is a great way to get some healing if you need it. And additionally, if you kick the spell, meaning you cost it for its kicker spell additionally, so instead of 3 mana, this would be 5, or 3 colorless mana and 2 white mana, you can create 5 colorless wells instead. So if you want to spend a bit more mana, you'll get a little bit more healing out of it. Unwavering Passage allows you to charge forward a pretty good distance, dealing damage and taunting foes that you hit with the spell. So if you want them to attack you, this is a good way to do it. But I foresee this spell being used more as mobility, like when you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies and you can't get away. This way you can charge through them and get away. Aura of Salvation is a great AoE heal that keeps you and creatures around you alive. So again, if you have creatures out, a bunch of creatures, and you want to keep them up, this is a great way to do that, and it's a pretty significant heal. Radiant Volley is just a great damaging ability. It also stuns targets in a straight line from you out to a pretty good distance, I'd say. And it's fairly wide, so you can hit a lot of enemies with it. It's not the widest cone or line spell I've seen, but it's still fairly good. Zealous Charge allows you to increase the power and toughness of your creatures by +2 for 8 seconds, which is going to make them bigger. It's going to make them stronger, so they're going to hit harder, and it's going to make them be able to take more damage before they die, so it's going to increase their health. Currently in the build I'm playing, it doesn't reflect in the stats when you buff the creatures, even though they do get larger and you can see their health pool sort of increase on their bar. This would be changed, I believe, in order to reflect it, in the health and DPS of the creature from like the little button on the side, so you can see exactly how much that increases it. Healing Recall is an instant heal spell that heals yourself and your creatures, not friendlies, just you and your creatures, and teleports those creatures that you control to your location. This could be good if maybe one of your creatures is getting beat up like off screen and you don't know what's happening, to bring them back and heal them, or if you just feel like everything's getting too spread out and you need to heal quickly. Radiant Shield is an excellent spell that lasts for 10 seconds that allows you to cast a damage shield on you and all the creatures you control. So if you have like 8 or 10 or 15 creatures or however many you have out, you're going to put a damage shield on you and all of them for 10 seconds. This should basically prevent most or all of the damage they take in that time, since it's very short. So this is a great way that you can prevent damage to like your whole group of creatures at once. Rebellion is an interesting spell that allows you for 8 seconds to make it so your creatures have Retaliate, which basically deals damage back to the attacker when hit. So the stronger the creature, the more damage they're going to deal back when they get hit, because it's based on their power. But this is allow your creatures to basically reflect damage to anything that hits them for 8 seconds, which is quite strong depending on how many creatures you have. Revenge is simply a damage dealing spell in a cone in front of you. that deals increased damage if you have less than 50% health. So if you have less than 50% health, this is going to deal 100% more damage. So that's a pretty good amount of damage. Judgment is an AoE that AoEs around you, and a pretty good AoE, I'd say, that deals damage and heals you at the same time, and your allies as well. So if you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies, you're not only going to hit them all, but you're going to heal yourself and your allies at the same time, which is fantastic. Phalanx Charge deals damage in a line in front of you, but it's a very, very big line. It's almost like very fat and very short compared to some of the other line effects. But it deals significant damage, and it deals 100% additional damage if, creatures or enemies in front of you are suffering the effects of crowd control. So if you crowd control them first, and then hit them with this, or maybe a friend of yours is using crowd controls and hits them with that, and then you hit them with this, you're going to deal a lot more damage, but it still hits like a truck to begin with. Heavenly Assault is the highest damage dealing white sorcery currently in the game. It deals a shit ton of damage, and it does it in a huge AoE. So if you need to wipe out a whole bunch of enemies from the screen, then this is the ability or spell that you want to hang on to, but it does cost 7 mana, so be prepared for that. So moving on to the creatures, we'll start out with Phantom Prowler. This is a cat creature that has lifelink, so whenever it deals damage, it heals you, which is great, and it can teleport to enemies over long distances, so it can get back into combat very quickly. It only costs 1 creature point, which is rather low, so it's not a bad creature to have in your deck if you just want to get something out for a low cost. Also, if you use the kicker by increasing the cost to 2 colorless and 2 white mana by holding the spell ability down, you're also going to heal yourself for a certain amount of healing when you cast it, which is right. So you can get a heal out of it and a creature in some cases. Chainwarden is better for its effect than it is in practice, in my opinion. It doesn't deal a ton of damage, and even though it can stun enemies with its attack periodically, its best benefit is when you first summon it into battle, it'll stun all the targets in one small-ish AoE. So make sure you hold this spell for when you want to stun a bunch of things, and don't just summon it before time like some creatures, because it actually performs better when you use it on a bunch of enemies rather than just throwing it up. Zealous Servant is a fantastic creature because for 3 mana you get a creature that is a 1/2, and it gains +1/+1 up to +4/+4 every time you take damage. This can literally take 1 second in some cases. That means you got a 5/6 creature for 3 mana more often than not, and it only costs 2 creature points. So this is a very, very good card. Banishing Priest like Chainwarden has a much better on-summon effect than it works as a creature. You want that on-summon effect more than you actually care about this creature. It exiles a creature from combat as long as it's in play, so you could remove potentially a very dangerous creature as long as this creature stays alive. It's not going to bother you, clear out all other creatures, and then kill it. If you move away or move too far away from the creature, if the Banisher Priest moves too far away, then the creature will become unexiled and return to combat and keep fighting again. So be wary of that, and also know that in case you want to kill that creature. Crusader of Odric is also a really good creature. It gains +1/+1 for every other creature you control, so obviously this creature is going to be best used in decks that have lots of creatures in order to gain the maximum benefit of that. It costs 2 points, which I think is pretty hefty for this, but if you have a lot of other creatures in play, particularly something like Benalish Archers, which casts 3 creatures when you cast it, that could make this creature, a 4/4 creature for 3 mana, which is good, and that's not including any other creatures you have. Fiendslayer Paladin is a 3/3 creature you can summon that also has lifelink, so it's going to heal you when it attacks, and it has the special ability that it can charge forward and align, damaging foes all along the path. It's pretty tanky, it doesn't die easy, and it heals you, but it doesn't deal a ton of damage, so keep that in mind when you select this card. Faithful Geist is a pretty good card in my opinion. It's a 3/2 creature for 3 mana, which is pretty good, and when it dies, it shields you and all the creatures you control, which is fantastic. So you basically want it to die. You want it to attack things, but you want it to die in order to get that bubble. And what's really nice is if you draw this card again while it's already out on the battlefield, you can actually use the card to sacrifice the creature instead of casting another one, which allows you to proc that effect and give a damage shield to all your creatures. Benalish Archers is 3 white mana for 3/1/1 archer creatures, which are really weak. They usually die in like 1 attack or 2 attacks, and this costs 2 points, which seems bad. But the benefit of this spell is using an index that, gain benefits from having lots of creatures, like some of the ones we mentioned earlier, where it gets +1/+1 for each creature out, or in some creatures like Benalish Marshall give you +1/+1 to all your creatures. So there's ways to boost them up, and you have spells in this deck that give them +1/+1 or +2/+2 and make them stronger. So this is a quick way to get a lot of creatures for 1 spell. So Benalish Marshall, as I mentioned, is a 3 mana creature for 2/2, but it gives all the other creatures you control +1/+1. This makes them bigger, makes them harder to kill, makes them deal more damage. So if you have this out when you have Benalish Archers, immediately they all become 2/2s for 3 mana instead of, 1/1s. So that's they increase 100% with this creature out. So that's a really good synergy there, and you want to use this creature in decks that have a lot of creatures. Galewing Griffin is a 4/5 creature that costs 5 mana, and it's a bit bigger, it's a bit tankier, it does okay damage, but it has a special ability that knocks back the foe in front of it and then repels it backwards, so it kind of can disrupt enemies, so to speak, and it costs 3 points, so it's going to use up, you know, a good chunk of your creature points if you take it, but it's definitely a lot stronger. Lightpiercer Angel is really nice for damage when you're fighting large groups of enemies because it not only its attacks shoot through, so it can go through one enemy and hit the other one, but it also has a special ability that it uses where it kind of like fires off a bunch of arrows in a cone that hits a lot of enemies. Keep in mind, these all pass through the enemies as well. So you have a lot of AoE DPS with this creature. If you're fighting a lot of small enemies or something, then this is a good creature to summon. Veteran Bodyguard is probably one of my favorite creatures in the game right now, especially in white, because it takes all damage dealt to you and instead redirects it to that creature. And why that's so good is that it has a very high toughness, so it doesn't die easily. You can increase that with things like Benalish Marshall or Glorious Anthem or other things that boost, you know, give that creature +1/+1 or +2/+2. And additionally, Lightshield Barrier works really well with this creature because it's probably going to have the highest toughness out of all the creatures you have, and it prevents all damage to that creature. That means all damage dealt to you goes to it, it takes none, and then it redirects that to all the creatures around you when it expires. So you have the potential to deal tons of damage to all the creatures around you while taking no damage. Angel of Vengeance is a pretty strong creature at 5/4 for 6 mana. It has lifelink, so it's going to heal you whenever it attacks. And additionally, it has an on-summon ability where it deals damage in an AoE wherever you cast it. So again, like some of these other creatures like Chainwarden or whatever, you're going to want to save this creature to cast it into a group of enemies for maximum effect. Divine Reclaimer is a really nice card, but I think it's much more beneficial in a deck that has a lot of strong creatures. Maybe if you match this with something like a green to get some really, you know, big creatures out there, or blue or something like that. Because what it does is, besides being a 5/5 for 7 mana, if you redraw this card while your Divine Reclaimer is out on the battlefield, you're going to be able to cast this to resurrect your strongest dead creature. Creatures have a certain amount of time after they die before they, you know, that they can be resurrected, so you got to do this fairly quickly. It can't be indefinitely, and you'll be able to tell because there'll be a little gray box where their, you know, their icon would normally be on the bottom right instead of a colored one, and you can resurrect them and bring them back. So if you have a really strong creature in your deck or a couple really strong creatures, this is going to pay off for you more than if you just have a bunch of small ones. Experimental Scorpion is actually an artifact creature, but like I mentioned, I'm going to include them here, and I'll include them in all the other color videos as well. But it's a 3/3 creature for 4 colorless mana. It also reduces the cost of artifact creatures you control what's out on the battlefield, so if you're going to play with a lot of artifacts, this is a good one to have in your deck. And also, when it dies, it summons 3 1/1 Spiraling artifact creature tokens for 30 seconds. So you're going to have these little spiraling tokens running around attacking things. This is a really good card in a deck that has lots of small creatures that are getting buffed, or an artifact deck. Experimental Sentinel is a pretty beefy creature at 5/5 for 6 mana. It's pretty hard to kill, and it has the ability of charging forward in a line dealing damage to enemies. But what's really great about it is when an artifact creature enters the battlefield under your control, you heal for a whole bunch of health. So this synergizes really nicely with Experimental Scorpion, because if you have that out, or if you cast that when this is out, you heal, but then when it dies and the 3 tokens come into play, you heal for all 3 of those tokens as well. Moving along finally to enchantments, there are 4 white enchantments currently in Magic Legends. And these are essentially work like sorceries. They aren't sorceries, but they work similarly in this game, but they have extended durations. All the ones you'll see here in this video have 30 seconds, so that just gives you some idea to the duration length. Ancestral Ward essentially gives you 50% reflect damage for 30 seconds, so this is really good if you're trying to be the thing that, you know, is being attacked. This works well with any of these spells that we mentioned before that taunt enemies so they attack you, so that you can reflect that damage. Restorative Boom allows you for 30 seconds to heal yourself and creatures you control whenever you cast a sorcery. So this is going to work well in a deck that's full of sorceries that maybe has some stronger creatures, or is full of, you know, a lot of creatures but has a decent amount of sorceries in it as well, in order to keep healing them and to keep getting the benefits of keeping them alive. Provocation is a good enchantment that lasts for 30 seconds and gives you lesser resistance, which reduces incoming damage, and allows you to, whenever you damage an enemy, you taunt them for 6 seconds. So again, this would synergize nicely with Ancestral Ward. You cast Ancestral Ward, then you cast Provocation, or vice versa, and now all of a sudden, every enemy that is attacking you, you're reflecting 50% damage to. And last but not least, the iconic Glorious Anthem makes an appearance here in Magic Legends. This boosts all the creatures you control by +1/+1 for 30 seconds. Again, this makes them have more health, makes them bigger appearance-wise on the battlefield, and it makes them deal more damage. So if you have a lot of creatures, like smallish creatures probably, or medium-sized creatures, this is a good card for your deck. Stay tuned for more Magic Legends content on this channel, and be sure to check out our other videos on all the other colored cards that are currently in the game, and be sure to check out the wiki if you have specific questions.